And welcome back to the show. Well, now we want to take a look at a very special exhibition that is in Melbourne at the moment at the Melbourne Museum. And that is the Titanic exhibition that has just been extended as well for a couple of more weeks because it's been so popular since it arrived at Melbourne's museum. Now, this is a exhibition like no other. I believe it came to Australia maybe about 10-15 years ago, but has been added to a lot since then. It basically has a lot of recreations in like the different parts of the Titanic being recreated, but it also has a lot of artifacts that have actually been rescued from the actual Titanic's wreckage. Everything from wash basins through to plates, so much different stuff. So, Lee, what were your thoughts on Titanic, the exhibition?
Well, I was really keen to get there because I knew time was running out and I thought I'm going to miss out on this. And yeah, I'm fascinated by the history of the Titanic. So I was very fortunate to see this. It's one of those things you don't know if you're going to get another chance, if it's ever going to come back again, and I certainly didn't want to miss out. I enjoyed looking at all the different artifacts that they had there, and as you mentioned, there was things like plates that had been at the bottom of the ocean for years and years, and to look at some of these things, they've come up really well. I can't believe that they were under the water so long and yet are so intact. So amazing. There was other things like, brushes and mirrors and medicine bottles and all sorts of things really. Iron window frames, and one of the things I really loved was that they recreated the staircase, the famous staircase with the clock in the wall and the statue of the cherub. And I really wanted to walk on it. Obviously, it's a display. You can't walk on it. But when I looked at it, it just took you to a place of, oh my goodness, this looks so real. And you could imagine people having walked on the real staircase of the Titanic and just enjoying this magnificent ship. There were other things that were really amazing to look at. They recreated cabins, and so there were bunk beds with bedspreads of the day and time and things like that. And of course, different parts of the ship. Another great thing was that they'd created an iceberg, and it actually is made of ice, and you could touch it actually, and it was, I found that just something that, added something extra to the exhibition. Now, the other thing that's really cool is that when you first arrive, you get a card of a description of a person that you are.
Who was a real passenger.
Yep. And it tells you their name, what class they were considered to be, so which part of the ship they would have been staying in, and tells their story. And then as you're walking through, you can read other people's stories on the wall, on the walls and things like that. But when you get to the very, very end, you actually check if your person that you've been assigned lived or died.
Now, I was pretty confident mine was going to survive because she was a first class woman. So in my head, I was thinking women and children first class. She would have been one of the first on the boat, and that was true. But yours was a little bit sketchier, a little bit more dicey.
Yeah, well, mine was a third class male.
Yep.
An Asian third class male. And because so many people died in that class, you get to see a huge board of how many survived. And first class obviously had the most survivors, percentage-wise.
Yeah, but percentage-wise, you were more likely to die if you were second class.
Yes.
Yeah, second class had less deaths than third class, but percentage-wise were more likely to die.
Yes, because there weren't enough lifeboats, I think,
On
that
their
level.
decks, yep.
Yeah. But mine survived too, amazingly. I had thought that they would have perished. But it was just interesting reading the stories. Now, the only downside I found to the exhibition was there was too many people in there. Too many people all at once. So you really want to go through the different rooms and the different areas of the ship, really. And it's in a timeline as well. So you're going through and you're kind of reading, this is the time it kind of might be. And then this is what's happening on the ship. And then you get to next area, and the timeline is obviously moving forward. And then obviously you get to the big tragedy. I wanted to read so much more, and I also wanted to look at the artifacts in more depth, but because there were so many people, you're kind of pushed and forced to move on. Also because you've got a time frame, really, because I think it's about an hour you're supposed to get through in, and I just felt like it was a rush job. Like, I really wanted to take some more time. What did you think, Dave?
Yeah, I really love how personal this felt, because you can read some of the stories up on the boards and marry it up to some of the items that are there. So for me, some of the highlights was there was a story on the board about a rich businessman who had left his wife but not told his wife, and was in Europe picking up his French mistress to bring her back across on the Titanic. And of course they both perished on the Titanic, but her perfume had survived and was some of the stuff that they'd brought off, and her perfume is still in the bottles that they've actually been able to rescue. They also had some of the belongings of Molly Brown, who Kathy Bates, of course, played in the Titanic movie. She was one of the she was a feminist at that time, and some of her belongings ended up surviving. So, of course, Jack and Rose were not so much fictitious characters, but based on multiple people, whereas Molly Brown, Kathy Bates' character, was actually based on a real person.
The James Cameron movie.
In the James Cameron movie, yeah. But one of the bits I think that really sunk home to me is, and we don't hear enough of this, there were actually Australians on board the Titanic. And as you're coming out of the exhibition, they've got a special part about Australians on board, and one man's belongings from Victoria, a lot of his belongings remain very much intact, right down to a race card for a greyhound meet in Australia, like his like what we would call an AFL record, like for a footy game. His booklet from this greyhound race was still intact, as was all of his Australian coins. So they've actually recovered Australian coins from the Titanic, which I thought was just absolutely amazing. I love the stories, though. There were so many different stories. There was another man's story that stuck out to me. So he died amongst the third-class passengers, but he was actually mega rich. But they kind of put in a nice way on the sign that he was known for being a little bit tight with money. So instead of buying a first-class ticket, he'd bought a third-class ticket because he was so tight. And they said it probably cost him his life. If he'd been in first class, he probably would have survived. But yeah, little things like that, even right down to the fact that they believe the reason that the Titanic sank was because in the rush to get the boat out to sea, because of a coal strike, there was a coal strike on at the time, and they had to rush a lot of stuff to get the boat out to sea. They forgot to put binoculars in the crow's nest. So the two guys that were up in the crow's nest on that night had no way of seeing the iceberg that was coming, because it said normally they would see an iceberg coming because of the waves washing onto the iceberg, it was a perfectly still night. So they were relying on binoculars, but they didn't have any. So there's little stories like that quite often get left out. That just the history buff in me was like completely obsessed with. And I also love the recreation. So what the different hallways look like, what the lobby looked like and things like that. I found it to be really, really spectacular. Lee, if you had to name one highlight from the exhibition, what would your highlight be?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can name just one, but just in a nutshell, yes, the artifacts as a whole, but that staircase just that was recreated, I just found that phenomenal.
Yeah. And there were people whispering when we were in there saying that it was the staircase from the Titanic movie. It's not, because James Cameron destroyed that. You and I watched a documentary about the making of Titanic, and most of what James Cameron designed for Titanic got destroyed because he is a director that believes in believability, and he actually flooded the entire Titanic set to make it look believable. With, I believe, 12 swimming pools, Olympic-sized swimming pools full of water, which that scene where you see the water coming down the stairs and sweeping Kate Winslet off her feet is all real.
And it was not warmed either.
No, she almost caught hypothermia, yeah. So, yeah, that is not the stairwell that's here in Melbourne at the moment. It is not from the James Cameron movie because that got completely destroyed when they were filming. So, but it's still an absolutely amazing exhibition. So, if you're going to be in Melbourne in the next few weeks, go along and see it. It's just had its season extended by 2 or 3 weeks because of how popular it's been. So if you are in Melbourne, go along to the Melbourne Museum and check out the Titanic exhibition.